What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel, and it is time to give you my 2024 ACC football spring power rankings for the upcoming 2024 college football season. We have already done the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12 throughout this week. If you have not seen those other Power 4 conference spring power rankings, be sure to go back and check them out right here on the channel. Now we're doing our last Power 4 conference, and that is, of course, the ACC. So I'm going to give you my updated power rankings here. Pretty much, again, this is based off of returning production, what all the teams do they have coming back this year on both sides of the football, what's their biggest weakness, and also what's their biggest strengths going into 2024. So let's go ahead and get right into it here. We'll start from the bottom and work our way to the top for our ACC spring power rankings. And we start here at the bottom. We start with number 17, and that's going to be Stanford. Stanford was pretty young last year. This will be their first year, of course, in the ACC. Newcomer, of course, coming over from the Pac-12, just like a lot of these other teams that are coming over from the Pac-12, or maybe some other conference out there. But you look at Stanford, I just don't think they have the roster talent to compete with some of these top teams in the ACC, but I think they'll be competitive in some games. I don't really expect them to go winless in the conference, and it's not like I think Stanford is going to be horrible. It's just because they don't have the talent. They just don't have any playmakers on both sides of the football either. But I think Stanford will be a little bit better this year. Again, they do have quite a bit of production coming back this year. They were pretty young last year, and I do expect that young team from last year to definitely get some veteran experience. And I think they'll be, I think they'll be an average type team. It's going to be pretty hard for them to make it to a bowl game, but it would really shock me if Stanford probably did make it to a bowl game. But again, I do expect Stanford to be a little bit better this year for 2024. So Stanford here at number 17 at the bottom of the ACC rankings. And then we move on to number 16. We got Wake Forest here at number 16. Wake Forest coming off a disappointing year last year. You look at the offensive side of the football, they're going to lose quite a bit of production from last year. So I do have some question marks about the offensive side of the football here for the Demon Dinkins. But you look at the defensive side of the football, I think that's going to be their biggest strength. They do have quite a bit of production there on the defensive side of the football coming back this year. So I think Wake Forest will be actually pretty good on the defensive side of the football. But again, it's kind of hard to tell how good this team is going to be, just like Stanford is. They just don't have the same kind of talent like they used to when Sam Hartman was there at quarterback. But they got some questions at quarterback as well. I mean, obviously that was a big concern going into 2023 last year for the Demon Dinkins. But again, this is a very consistent ACC team. It wouldn't really shock me if they did make it to a bowl game and definitely have a better season. But again, I just have a lot of concerns for Wake Forest. Kind of hard to tell how good they're going to be, especially after the season they had from last year. So the Demon Dinkins here at number 16. Moving on to number 15, we got California. Another newcomer, of course, coming over from the Pac-12. I actually think Cal has a chance to be a really good team this year. They got a good amount of production coming back on the offensive side of the football. Defensively, I think they could be quite good there as well. They do have some question marks, but I think this has a chance to be a really consistent California team. Not saying they're going to be very terrible. I think they can definitely do better than that number 15 power ranking. But based off of their, returning production, but, it's kind of hard to tell how good they're going to be in their first year in the ACC. Again, just like Stanford, do they have the roster talent? Do they have any playmakers that could step up for them? I mean, we did see that a little bit last year. They did make it to a bowl game, so I think California actually might be a very competitive team. But either way, they are here at number 15 of my spring power rankings. They did move up just a little bit, compared to my way too early power rankings back in the month of January. So California here, I do expect them to be very competitive in their first year in the conference. So they're here at number 15 for me in these power rankings. Moving on to number 14, we got Virginia. Virginia obviously was one of the worst teams, not one of the worst teams in the ACC from last year. They were actually very competitive in some games against the top teams in the ACC. You look at this Virginia team, I think they have a chance to be pretty good. They were pretty young last year. They do return almost everybody on the offensive side of the football. So Virginia actually might be a very consistent offensive team. Defensively, you do have some question marks there, but if their defense can make some stops on third downs, and if they can get some offensive teams like some other teams off the field on third downs, this definitely could be a very good, sneaky Virginia team. Not saying they're going to be a dark horse contender or a top contender or anything like that, but it wouldn't really shock me if the Cavaliers did make it to a bowl game. A lot of people think this Virginia team is definitely going to be a better team than it was from last year, and definitely from the years before. You know, Virginia definitely used to be one of the worst teams in the ACC, but I don't really see it playing out that way. I think Virginia definitely has a chance to be a lot better, and again, offensively, I think they'll be very consistent, but defensively, you do have some concerns there, but, you know, Virginia's defense will get better throughout the season, so I got the Cavaliers here at number 14. Moving on to number 13, we got the Duke Blue Devils. Obviously, this won't be the same Duke team that we saw from a year ago, and then, of course, from the year before in 2022 when they won 9 games. Mike Elko, of course, taking the Texas A&M job. That's going to be a huge loss here for the Blue Devils, so they are going to be pretty young. Lost a lot of guys from last year's team, either from the transfer portal and also like maybe from graduation or to the NFL. So Duke is not going to be the same team, but I don't think they're going to be very terrible. I don't think it's going to be a big step back for them. I think they'll be right there somewhere, like right around like maybe close to a bowl game, maybe like 5-7. Or maybe like, 6-6, or maybe like 7-5 perhaps. But again, if Duke does worse than that, you like maybe, for example, go 4-8 or 3-9, that would definitely be a really disappointing start for the first-year head coach. But again, Duke is not going to be a very terrible team. They're going to just be young this year, just not going to have the same kind of talent like they did from the year ago. So the Duke Blue Devils here at number 13. Moving on to number 12, we got Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech was a very big surprise last year, obviously. This program seems like it's heading in the back in the right direction, I should say, as a program in the ACC like they used to be. Well, you look at Georgia Tech's schedule. It's very tough this year. They got to play some of the top teams in the ACC, but I think they'll be very competitive in some of those games, like maybe, for example, North Carolina and Miami. Those are the 2 teams that they beat last year in the ACC, so I think they do have a chance to be competitive in both of those games. But you look at the non-conference schedule, they do play Notre Dame and Georgia. They got to play Georgia on the road. That's going to be very tough for them. But you look at their roster and everything, they do have a good amount of production, almost everybody coming back on the offensive side of the football. So just like Virginia, I think they can be a very consistent offensive team. But defensively, I mean, I do have some question marks there for Georgia Tech. They lost a lot of production there. They're going to be pretty young on that side of the football. So that is the one concern that I have for Georgia Tech going into 2024. But I think they're going to be a pretty good team. I think they can definitely make it to a bowl game at least. So they're here at number 12 for me on my power rankings here for the ACC. Moving on to number 11, we got Boston College. Boston College, you look at them from last year, definitely had a very easy schedule. And they had a really good experienced roster as well, but it really wasn't enough to kind of come up with like a winning season. They did make it to a bowl game at least, but you look at this schedule this year, it's more tougher in 2024. They got to play Michigan State and Missouri both in the non-conference. They get Michigan State at home, but they play Missouri on the road. Those are going to be very tough non-conference games. But you look at the roster, almost everybody is coming back on the offensive side of the football. Defensively, like with Virginia and Georgia Tech, they're going to have some question marks there. Just not a very talented defensive team, but I think they'll be definitely a very consistent offensive team. They won't be like a top 10 offense in the country, just like Virginia and Georgia Tech will be. Georgia Tech and Virginia won't be top 10 offensive teams, but Boston College definitely has a chance to be a very consistent offensive team. I think they'll definitely be right there, maybe to score like 30-something points a game. So Boston College, I think at best they can probably still make it to a bowl game this year in 2024. So they're here at number 11 for me, just outside the top 10. Moving on to number 10 now, we got Pittsburgh here. I think Pittsburgh is going to have a turnaround of a season. It was a very tough season for them last year, going just 3-9. And it was definitely a disappointment for Pittsburgh, to say the least. This is one of the very consistent teams in the ACC throughout the history of college football and also the history of this conference as well. Pittsburgh, I don't know what happened to them. I feel like they were pretty young last year. Maybe they lost some of those great players, and maybe that's why they had a very big step back. Plus, the schedule was kind of tough for them as well, but I do expect Pittsburgh to turn things around. However, I don't really expect them to be a dark horse contender in the ACC just because, the way the season went from last year. I just don't see them being a dark horse contender, but I do expect them to be like somewhere like 6, 7, 8 win type team or something like that. It would really shock me if Pittsburgh did win like 8 games, to be honest, and maybe 9. But Pittsburgh is in here in the top 10 for me at number 10. Again, I think this is going to be a very big turnaround here for Pittsburgh after a really rough season last year in 2023. So the Panthers here at number 10. Moving on to number 9, we got a newcomer here, of course. It's SMU. SMU here just inside the top 10 for me. I don't know how good this team is going to be in their first year in the ACC, just like of all the other newcomers, but I feel like SMU will be a very competitive team, just like, with Stanford and, Cal. They'll definitely be very competitive in their first year in the conference, but maybe they don't have the roster talent like all these other teams that they have in the ACC, like some of those top teams in the conference and everything, but I think SMU will definitely be a very competitive team. That's why I do have them here in the top 10. And again, I don't really know what to expect here for this team, but you look at the roster, they're going to be quite a little bit young. But I think they'll have definitely a good enough roster to definitely compete with all these, some of these teams in the ACC. Probably not the top teams, but we'll see what happens here. As again, SMU is heading into their first year in the ACC conference. So SMU here at number 9, just inside the top 10. Moving on to number 8, we got North Carolina. And I know a lot of people are going to say, why is North Carolina this far back and why are they not in the top 5? Well, for example, North Carolina is going to have a lot of roster turnover. A lot of guys are going to be gone on both sides of the football. Drake May, of course, is now gone into the NFL, or actually into the NFL, I should say, not to the NFL draft. He was already drafted and everything. But you just look at this North Carolina roster. They're going to be so young. They only return about 37% on the offensive side of the football, unless they have some transfers that can help them out. And then defensively, they only return about 36% on the defensive side of the football. So yeah, this is going to be a very young North Carolina team. I don't really know what to expect for them, but I think they'll still be at least inside the top 10 for like in the conference and everything. I don't really expect them to be a dark horse contender just because of the roster, and also be a top contender and playoff contender just because of the roster as well. So again, the reason why North Carolina is here at number 8 is because they do lose a lot of talent from last year's team. So the Tar Heels are going to be quite young this year, and that's why they're here at number 8 in these power rankings. Moving on to number 7, we got Syracuse. Syracuse has a chance to be pretty good this year. They got Kyle McCord, the transfer quarterback, coming over from Ohio State. We'll see how good he's going to be in this system here for the Syracuse offense. And you look at Syracuse, you look at their roster, they're going to have almost everybody coming back on the offensive side of the football. So I don't think Syracuse is going to be a dark horse contender, but they do have a chance to really be a good team this year just because of how their schedule sets up as well. You look at that schedule, they don't have to play like some of the top teams from the ACC from last year. They also don't have to play Clemson, which I think is good news there for the Orange as well. So I do expect Syracuse to be right around like maybe 6, 7, 8 wins, something like that. This team definitely can make it to a bowl game just because of how the schedule sets up for them. But again, you look at the offensive side of the football, I think they're going to be a very consistent offensive team. Defensively, you may have some question marks there, but I think this Syracuse team has a chance to be a pretty good team. So watch out here for the Orange for 2024. They're here at number 7, though, in my power rankings. Moving on to number 6, we got NC State. I think NC State definitely will be a dark horse contender this year in the conference, but not definitely a top contender. They did lose some talent from last year's team, but this has a chance to be a very consistent team this year on both sides of the football, just like Wake Forest and Pittsburgh. Maybe like a top, consistent program perhaps. But this NC State team, I think they'll be a top 25 team at least. NC State's schedule is not that horrible. Yes, they do play North Carolina on that schedule every single year. They also play Tennessee out of the non-conference, but that's a game that they can probably win. So NC State here, they're just outside the top 5 just because there are some great teams. Also like some other ACC teams out on this list, in the top 5 especially, that have more returning production coming back than the Wolfpack does. But again, NC State, I do expect them to be a top 25 team this year, and definitely a dark horse contender in the ACC. All right, let's get to the top 5 now. So at number 5, I got Virginia Tech. So just like North Carolina, why is Virginia Tech so high on this list? Well, take a look at the returning production that the Hokies have coming back this year. They return almost everybody back on the offensive side of the football. They have the most returning production coming back in 2024 out of all the teams that you're seeing in the FBS level. And the defensive side of the football should be very good as well. I think this Virginia Tech team has a chance to be not a dominant team, but definitely a dark horse contender in the ACC just because of their returning production and everything. This team is just absolutely loaded with experience on both sides of the football. So again, Virginia Tech has a chance to be really good this year. That's why they're here in the top 5 for me in my spring power rankings for 2024, just because of that returning production. So watch out here for the Virginia Tech Hokies. They're here at number 5 in these power rankings. Moving on to number 4, we got Clemson. Clemson is a team that I'm kind of having a hard time figuring out how good they're going to be. I think Clemson is still going to be a very talented team. They'll definitely be a really talented team, but you just look at the offensive side of the football, they have almost everybody coming back there. But again, it's all about the offense every single year now these days. The offense has really struggled in the last 3 years. They just haven't been able to get that offense going back to where it needs to be when Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson were here at Clemson. And the bad thing about Clemson is that they don't use the transfer portal that much. And I just think that's a really bad move there by Dabo Swinney. If he doesn't use the transfer portal, Clemson definitely will be a very inconsistent team. But if they did use the transfer portal, Clemson would definitely be a lot more talented. And they definitely would be that dominant team once again in the ACC. But you just look at Clemson, though. Again, the obvious question is definitely going to be the offensive side of the football. But you look at the defense, they do lose quite a lot of talent from last year's team, but they obviously will reload on that defensive side of the football like they always do every year. So I'm not really concerned about the defense for Clemson. I'm just really concerned about the offensive side of the football. We'll see how Cade Klubnik does in his junior season and see if he'll have a really better season, kind of compared to sophomore year. So, I mean, he hasn't been able to get things going just yet. I mean, he's got to be very consistent. And, there's been inconsistencies from the quarterbacks in the last 3 years for Clemson as well. So, again, it's all going to be about the offensive side of the football for Clemson. It's also going to be about the quarterback position. Again, I'm not really concerned about the defensive side of the football for Clemson in 2024. But just because of that offense, they're here at number 4 in my power rankings. And then moving on to number 3, we got Miami. I think Miami has a chance to be a really better team this year, kind of compared to the last 2 years. Obviously, they were 5-7 in 2022, and then last year just 7-5. So yeah, this was a very inconsistent Miami team last year, but you look at what they've done this year in 2024 in the offseason. They will bring in Cam Ward, the transfer from Washington State at quarterback. I think he has a chance to be one of the top quarterbacks, maybe in the ACC coming up this year out of all these other quarterbacks. But you just look at the roster. I mean, they're going to be really loaded with talent on both sides of the football. They brought in a ton of transfers from the transfer portal. They brought in a really good recruiting class, and Mario Cristobal did a really good job. But again, will this Miami team be very consistent? That's going to be the obvious question. We've seen some inconsistencies now for the last 2 years. We'll see if Miami can definitely have a better turnaround of a season, and they definitely could be really a top contender, maybe even a playoff contender. But as of right now, I don't have them listed as a playoff contender, but I do have them listed as a top contender just because of what they've done in the offseason. So Miami here at number 3. Moving on to number 2, we got Louisville. You look at Louisville, they lost a lot of production on the offensive side of the football, but defensively they do bring back almost everybody back on the defensive side of the football. So I don't really have any concerns for the defense for the Cardinals, but I mean, you think that the offense will definitely be a little bit of a step back from where they were the year before, but no. Jeff Brom knows what it takes. Obviously he's used the transfer portal for the last, just his first year last year, used the transfer portal to his game, and also he used it a lot again this year. He does bring in a transfer quarterback from Texas Tech. We'll see how good he does in this system here for the Louisville Cardinals passing game. That obviously definitely was a big struggle last year for Louisville, was the passing game. I feel like they need to improve that passing game production going into the season this year. And I think they definitely need to run the football just a little bit better. But again, that offense should be very good with the transfers that they have coming in. And again, defensively, I don't really see any concerns there for Louisville coming up for 2024. So Louisville is number 2, but my number 1 team is obviously going to be the Florida State Seminoles. So Florida State is still my favorite to win it all in the ACC this year. Florida State's going to lose a lot of production from last year. They do lose plenty of good weapons on the offensive side of the football and also defensively as well. But you know how Mike Norvell is, just like Jet Brom and Mario Cristobal. Reloaded, of course, in the transfer portal. He has used the transfer portal really good this year again. They will bring in DJ Oagale, the former Clemson quarterback and former Oregon State quarterback, coming over from the transfer portal. So we'll see how good he is for this Florida State offensive system under Mike Norvell. Again, Florida State's not going to be the same team as they were from last year that went undefeated with Jordan Travis, but I still think they're probably the favorites to win the conference this year. And they're definitely, with a 12-team playoff, they are definitely a playoff contender, but maybe not a top 10 team, maybe just a top 15, just because of the roster that they're losing from last year. But again, this will still be a really good Florida State team, no question about it. And still, they're probably the favorites to win the ACC once again here for 2024. So Florida State here at number 1 for me in my spring power rankings. And those are my official spring power rankings here for the ACC conference for the upcoming 2024 college football season. Let me guys know what you think about these spring power rankings down in the comments below. Do you agree or disagree? And also give me your power rankings for the ACC down in the comments below as well. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned here for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports Channel.